Castle murder, was killed by a shotgun blast to the head. There was no police investigation, and his body was cremated before an autopsy could be performed. June 1995, Mike Samples, another grand jury witness, was shot to death. Sources claim he had been involved in retrieving drugs dropped from airplanes. Authorities have denied any connection between these cases and the murders of Kevin and Don.
The people whose testimony might have solved this case years ago have systematically been eliminated.
Year-old Kevin Ives and 16-year-old Don Henry were struck by a train near Alexander. The medical examiner has said that the boys were asleep and drugged with marijuana. The parents, however, disputed that claim and persuaded authorities to reopen the case.
It was a strange place for two teenage boys to be, lying on the train tracks in the middle of the woods near Bryan, Arkansas. By the time the three men and the lead engine of the northbound Union Pacific saw the boys, it was already too late. Risking derailment, the engineer threw the mile-long train into emergency and laid down on its horn. Despite the vibration of the tracks, the screeching of metal against metal, and the deafening blast of the horn, the boys didn't move. The train's powerful headlight allowed the engineer, conductor, and brakeman to see that the boys were loaded with a target. Moments later, the train overtook the motionless boys. The victims were Don Henry, 16, and Kevin Ives, 17, both of Saline County, Arkansas. They would have started their senior year at Bryan High School the next day. Kevin had spent the night at Don's house, and the two had ventured outside a little after midnight, never to return. The two had ventured outside a little after midnight, never to return.
The whole reason there has been no justice for Kevin and Don's murders is because of why they were murdered. Answering the issue first being run by the late infamous cocaine smuggler Barry Seal, and was one of the facets of the Iran-Contra operations that was never revealed to the American public. Slightly the why the cover-up of Kevin and Don's murders happened, and it began immediately into the investigation and would continue throughout the years, resulting in 10 different local, state, and federal investigations, grand juries, etc., all bearing down on different locations in Arkansas, including Saline and surrounding counties, and the Mena Airport as well, all being shut down before any final word would be allowed into the public record.
All being shut down before any final word would be allowed into the public record.
Anytime you're dealing with a homicide that has any type of drug ties to it, you always run into those problems where you got a lot of different stories.
A train traveling 50 miles an hour conducts the track just ahead. Unable to stop, the train runs over two people covered by a tarp. 17-year-old Kevin Ives and 16-year-old Don Henry dragged nearly a mile. The first autopsy deems it a suicide. Their bodies exhumed 1 year later. The case turns to a homicide.
We have several people that said they were in the woods. We have no one that has said that they were at the scene.
Lieutenant Mike Frost, head of Saline County's Criminal Investigation Division, now leads the investigation.
There are not a whole lot of leads, new leads that come in. I do not have a detective assigned to the case. I am the one who goes through the case. I've been through the case files and try to follow up on things that I can find in the case file from that time frame.
Lieutenant Frost says the case has been met with numerous challenges. He says the biggest, perhaps, speculation.
It really makes it difficult to get a handle on exactly what happened on the case.
On top of speculation are claims of a government cover-up.
No, there has not been. As long as I've been in the sheriff's office, I have been in the criminal investigation division.
Some suggest the police saw an aircraft dropping money and drugs tied to an alleged drug ring based out of Mena involving government officials.
There is nothing thing that I can see that has tied Mina to this case. That's not saying that it wasn't.
Lieutenant Frost says witnesses withhold information out of fear for their lives. Key evidence crucial, like crime scene pictures and the entire grand jury testimony, all missing from the file. Also, he says several potential witnesses are now deceased.
So many of the people who were as witnesses have since passed. And like I say, a lot of people say a lot of people were murdered, which they may have been. There are a lot of people who died of natural causes.
But Lieutenant Frost maintains the case is solvable. It just takes finding the right person with the right information.
When I know of one individual that I would love to be able to talk to that has been missing for many years, that very well may be tied into it, but he has never been found.
Daniel Wolfson for today's THV.
Because of their persistence, Kevin and Don's bodies were exhumed. New autopsies were performed, and a grand jury was convened. Dr. Joseph Burton, a nationally recognized forensic pathologist from out of state, performed the new autopsies. His findings revealed that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back, and Kevin Ives' face had been smashed by a blow from a rifle butt before their bodies were placed on the railroad tracks.
This information alone would strongly suggest that the boys were injured, rendered unconscious, or even killed prior to their bodies being run over by the train.
Burton's autopsies also revealed that Malik had mutilated Kevin's skull by sawing it in so many different directions that it was impossible to tell where the original skull fractures were. Malik also had completely dismantled Kevin's jawbones. Burton stated he had performed thousands of autopsies and had never seen anything like it.
Burton stated he had performed thousands of autopsies and had never seen anything like it.
Was Malik trying to hide something?
Was there a stab? The answer is no, they were not stabbed. Were they dead beforehand? Absolutely no, they were alive.
A former employee at the crime lab has said he discovered what appeared to be evidence of a stab wound during the original autopsy, but was told, quote, not to worry about it. Malik has refused all comment.
The deaths of these two boys most probably were not accidental deaths, but that they met their death as a result of injuries inflicted on them by other people or another person.
In addition to Burton, 2 other forensic pathologists and 7 forensic investigators with more than 100 years accumulated experience investigating homicides reviewed the case. It was their collective opinion that the ruling be changed to murder.
During the midst of all of the turmoil with trying to get the ruling changed in our case, it became very apparent that this was not an isolated instance of an error in the ruling on the manner of death. There were many other cases statewide that we became aware of.
In 1992, the Los Angeles Times tallied more than 20 additional cases where Dr. Malik had falsified evidence and ruled incorrectly. One case involved the murder of Raymond Albright, who had been shot 5 times in the chest with a Colt .45. Incredibly, Malik had ruled suicide. Another involved James Dewey Milam, whose body was found without the head. In this case, Malik ruled the cause of death to be an ulcer. Although Milam's head had been clearly severed with a knife, Malik claimed the family pooch had bitten off the head, eaten the entire thing, and then regurgitated. Malik says he tested the dog's vomit and found traces of Milam's brain and skull. Unfortunately for Dr. Malik, Milam's head was later found. Malik, it turns out, had made up the entire story. Media coverage of Malik's dishonest rulings resulted in a massive public outcry, calling for his removal from office.
The medical examiner comes up and he has fabrication to where he has created his own evidence.
This is of a magnitude that could create a national scandal, and if necessary, it will.
Yes.
You can say that you are lying on his autopsy cases, lying in court. And he's not an honest person. That's why he should be prosecuted. He should be prosecuted.
Nevertheless, both Governor Clinton and the Arkansas State Medical Examiner Commission Chairman, Jocelyn Elders, who had the power to remove Malik from office, not only insisted he remain, they gave him a raise.
Based on the facts I have,
I really feel that Arkansas owes Dr. Malik a great debt and a real apology.
Today, the governor was asked if Malik should resign.
I don't think that's a decision that I should make based on what I know.
I was asked if Malik should resign. I don't think that's a decision that I should make based on what I know.
We were absolutely puzzled and outraged over the ruling of accidental as a manner of death. We didn't think that the facts supported that ruling, and what we started out to do was just to obtain a second opinion. We met resistance from all fronts, from law enforcement, from the crime lab. We retained an attorney and a private investigator and obtained court orders to get testable samples of everything that they had in order to get a second opinion. And Femi Malik refused to obey the court orders. It didn't matter what Malik did, whether it was perjure himself in court, fabricate evidence in murder trials, call coroners murderers. Clinton defended him by excusing it as being stressed out, overworked, and underpaid. His testimony compromised evidence in a lot of felony cases in Arkansas. And it was very transparent that the end result was that he was given a $14,000 raise. It was an absolute insult to my family.
Read my lips. I'm not going to comment.
Dr. Malik refused repeated requests to talk with us. But when we caught up with him, he said people didn't like him because he's from Egypt. And he claimed he had never made a single mistake in any of the 7,000 autopsies he conducted. People say that as the state medical examiner, you were incompetent and you bungled cases, and that Governor Clinton, for some reason, defended you and protected you. Is that the case?
You have to understand that I did 7,000 autopsies. Not one single case overturned because of me.
Not a single case?
Not one single case.
But that's just not true.
The special grand jury has now disbanded. 3 hours ago, it delivered its final report on the deaths of 2 teenage boys. But the grand jury was not allowed to do what it wanted.
It delivered its final report on the deaths of 2 teenage boys, but the grand jury was not allowed to do what it wanted.
I know that because you could not repeat and report much of the testimony that you heard and evidence that you received, that you are somewhat frustrated by it. And that's understandable.
In the final analysis, I know that the grand jury hated at this point to give it up, because I think the public needs to know about the seriousness of the drug problem here in Saline County and maybe other surrounding counties.
I think that Mr. McCaskill was probably suffering from a lot of paranoia. And right now the indications are that nobody else was involved.
Might there have been a reason, though, for his paranoia?
I'm sure there was a reason for his paranoia.
Because he had talked to the police or the prosecutor?
I don't know that that would be the reason.
What about the murder? Is it connected at all with the grand jury investigation?
Not that we know of.
McCaskill was a witness in the Bryant train deaths investigation. Although police haven't ascertained a motive for the murder, they say there's no connection.
Link this investigation to the deaths of Don Henry or Kevin Ives. And I don't foresee anything in the pursuance of the rest of this investigation that would be anything that would make me change my mind.
Arnold came into my office, stood in front of my desk, looked me straight in the face, and said, "Jean, you are not to use the Drug Task Force to investigate any public official." He turned on his heel and marched out. Now, as startling as that statement might sound, I really didn't think that it was going to pose any kind of problem, because at that time I didn't have any indication that there was any public official in our judicial district who was involved in drugs.
At that time, I didn't have any indication that there was any public official in our judicial district who was involved in drugs.
I hired undercover officers, learned what I could to help the district get on its feet with investigation of drug activities in the district.
Instantly, one of her investigators reveals that the now infamous train
agencies in our district and the connections that we made almost immediately led to several public officials, and the person whose name came up immediately and most frequently was Dan Harmon.
3 years had passed since the boys had been killed, and Jean had no way of knowing that her drug task force was about to be shut down for nearly solving Kevin and Don's murders.
It didn't occur to me that it was appropriate for our drug task force to reopen the case of the boys on the track until one of my undercover officers came to me and told me that not only was the case drug-related, but it was also solvable. He asked permission to investigate, and I agreed to that and told him that we would take our information then to Bob Govar.
Ironically, Dan Harmon and Richard Garrett, the very same men who had conducted the grand jury investigation of Kevin and Don's murders, were two of the main targets of Govar's drug and corruption investigation. Linda Ives, who for years had believed Harmon and Garrett were sincerely trying to solve her son's murder, now realized they were the ones orchestrating the cover-up.
We certainly don't have any suspects at this point in time. It's been quite a while. And I really didn't anticipate that it would take this long when we first started. I'm frustrated in the amount of time that it's taken. Frustrated that we weren't able to accomplish some things that we probably should have been able to. Whatever comes out of it, if someone's charged or not charged, the grand jury has done a tremendous job.
But still will leave the open question if the boys were murdered, who did it?
Well, until it's solved, that's correct.
To make matters worse, Harmon suddenly became the prosecutor-elect for a 3-county district, which included Saline County. Harmon, who had friends in the Arkansas press, wasted no time in launching a massive media smear campaign against Jean Duffy.
He immediately began a media crusade against him.
Detective John Brown, a 16-year law enforcement veteran, had moved his family into the Saline County area. The Ives family had asked the new sheriff to reopen the case, and John was given the assignment. However, just like Jean Duffy, John's first day on the job included a peculiar request from his boss.
My immediate supervisor, who was a lieutenant of the Saline County Criminal Investigation Division, took me for a ride that lasted approximately 1 hour. During this ride to literally nowhere, it appeared the whole purpose was to tell me to leave the case alone. He said things like, there's not anything to this. This could have been an accident. It's going to bring you a lot of grief.
Was to tell me to leave the case alone. He said things like, there's not anything to this. This could have been an accident. It's going to bring you a lot of grief. It's going to bring you a lot of grief.
If you continue on and do this. And in the end, he finally said, John, you really need to leave this alone.
John was disturbed by his superior's attitude, and his concern escalated once he began examining the Ives-Henry case file.
It became obvious that once I started going through the case file, it had been robbed of most of the pertinent evidence. No crime scene photographs, a list of evidence was not present, the things you would expect to run across a young lady named Charlene Wilson, who told a horror story that I didn't really believe at the time. So I started searching for evidence to substantiate just part of what she had said. Harmon went ballistic. He called, he threatened me, threatened Sheriff Pridgeon, threatened Captain Gene Donham, the chief deputy. All because I talked to this one woman.
To date, a total of 9 separate state and federal investigations into Mina have been shut down.
The first indication I had that Mina may tie to the death of these 2 kids was through an audio tape provided to me by Russell Welch, an Arkansas State Police investigator assigned to Mina. The tape was of a confidential informant inside the Federal Corrections Facility.
that tape would allege that Don Henry and Kevin Ives were killed because of a connection to Mena, Arkansas. An actual report was generated by Saline County Sheriff's Office in 1987 and in 88 of people complaining of the planes flying over the tracks at approximately 100 feet above ground level with their lights out at night. I have interviewed 5 pilots, 4 of which can verify the A-12 location, being the tracks just west of Little Rock, Arkansas, where these 2 kids' bodies were found.
It is tonight's top story. Police say the 6-month investigation that landed Harmon behind bars also led to the arrest of a dozen other people in Grant County. Police say it's a drug operation ranging from cocaine to painkillers. THV's Faith Abube joins us now with more. Faith?
Hi, Liz. Police say Harmon was illegally selling prescription drugs near Sheridan School. While there's no evidence linking him and the 12 other suspects, police say they are all part of an ongoing drugs team.
Anybody sell drugs in Grant County?
Former Saline County prosecutor Dan Harmon is back behind bars, barely 4 years after serving time for extortion, racketeering, and drug conspiracy from a 1997 conviction. Harmon is among the last few alleged drug dealers taken off Sheridan streets after a 6-month investigation. Harmon lives in Saline County, but the investigation led police here to a traffic stop. Police say they found several drug items in his car. Harmon's passenger, a well-known drug dealer, is also now helping authorities.
Anytime you're dealing with narcotics and dealing with this tough criminal element, it can be dangerous. Get dangerous anytime.
Assistant Chief Brent Cole says the former prosecutor is facing several felony charges that could land him in prison, this time for life.
I think it's sad, the man was a prosecutor. He used to prosecute people for the same crime that he's committed.
Police are not releasing any information or photographs of the 12 other suspects, but they also face serious charges. Cole says for a small community the size of Sheridan, he hopes the sting sends a message to offenders still out there.
No matter who you are, we'll come after you.
Even though police say Harmon was selling the drugs near school, they don't believe he sold them to any young kids. He's still behind bars tonight on a $100,000 bond. Liz?
All right, Faith, thank you. Harmon served 1 term as Saline County prosecutor in 1979. Voters elected him again in the 90s for 2 terms. He resigned after his 1996 arrest. He got out of prison early in 2006 for helping prosecutors in a murder case.
Charlene was recommended to our task force as an informant from DEA, who had used her as an informant, and also from at least 2 other law enforcement agencies that had used her as an informant and said that she was reliable. I used Charlene, and she proved to be very, very reliable. There was not one bit of information that she ever gave me that didn't pan out.
There was not one bit of information that she ever gave me that didn't pan out.
The people at the track that night, to my knowledge, were Dan Harmon, Keith McCaskill, Larry Rochelle. I do know that the boys were watching the drop site, okay? And they got curious as to what was being dropped there.
Ives turned this witness over to a local investigator who took him to the FBI. The FBI immediately put this witness into protective custody, gave him a polygraph test, which he passed, and opened their investigation.
Where we didn't realize there was anybody else out there at first. We were, just like I said, goofing off. We come up on, or didn't really come up on, we noticed there were people on the tracks. A flashlight come on and then go back off. They weren't looking in our direction, but we could see the light. And so we kind of quieted down and snuck up a little bit closer to see what was going on, and there was 5 individuals standing on the tracks. One thing that struck my curiosity is at the time my mother was dating an attorney named Dan Harmon. I knew well enough to recognize him. There were 2 more individuals that a few minutes after we got there were walking down the railroad tracks that had a rifle and what looked to be a flashlight. They were more or less kind of minding their own business. And when they realized someone else was on the tracks, they stopped and was fixing to turn around when someone, or Danny, motioned for them to come closer over to where they were. They hesitated and eventually ended up walking on towards the rest of the group. While my head was turned, I heard what sounded like a gunshot. I saw a flash, as you would expect with a gunshot at night. We were pretty much terrified and bolted and ran.
Other witnesses corroborated that evidence.
I know that Dan Harmon went down there because I was down the road from there. I was in an automobile. I do know that a drop was made. I've absolutely 100% unequivocally made there.
He was feared for his life, a couple of months before. He said a couple of times that he knew people, that he was being watched, and he was afraid.
Mrs. Alexander says her son knew the 2 teenagers run over by the train, and she says he indicated to her he had been there when the boys had died, that he spotted 2 attackers.
But he knew there was 2 there. I did try to get him to tell me that, and he was either afraid or didn't know.
In the English language that can describe how it makes you feel as a parent or as a citizen of Arkansas, to see what our officials are capable of doing. I think we were just kind of naive, common, ordinary people. Got up and went to work every day and came home and went to bed and assumed that everybody else did the same thing and tried to do what was right. And I think Kevin's death has been the rudest awakening that anybody could ever have, to see what really goes on and to see what's important to elected and public officials. This is not a political issue with me. We were never a political family. Our lives revolved around the ball field and going to the lake, and all of the things that a family does, until the Arkansas political machine reached into our lives and destroyed the tranquility that we had. And I want the American people to know that we have to stand up against this kind of corruption, and we have to hold our officials accountable and make them work for us instead of against us. In my experience, I believe what is happening here in Arkansas is only a small sample as to what is happening nationwide, and I believe that all of America has to stand up and rescue the American system of justice. An attorney, a private investigator, and obtained court orders to get testable samples of everything that they had in order to get a second opinion, and Femi Malik refused to obey the court orders.
Without any supporting evidence, Malik ruled that the boys had each smoked more than 20 marijuana cigarettes, and in a psychedelic stupor had fallen asleep on the tracks. It was later learned that the state crime lab never even tested for the concentration of marijuana, and in fact, had used a test on the boys' blood which was designed to be used on urine.
That the state crime lab never even tested for the concentration of marijuana, and in fact, had used a test on the boys' blood which was designed to be used on urine.
Outside experts were shocked at the absurd ruling. The family's Malik. However, after 13 long months, the parents were finally able to prove what they had believed all along, that the boys had indeed been murdered. In what would turn out to be the most ironic twist in this case, Deputy Prosecutor Richard Garrett and his friend defense attorney Dan Harmon approached Linda Ives and convinced her that they would do everything in their power to catch those responsible for the murder of their son. Harmon was subsequently appointed special prosecutor to head the grand jury probe. However, as his investigation advanced, potential witnesses began turning up dead. May 1988. Keith Coney, who was believed to be with Kevin and Dawn that night, told friends and family members that law enforcement officials were responsible for the murders. 2 days later, he was killed when his motorcycle crashed while he was being chased. According to some officers, his throat had previously been slashed.
His motorcycle crashed while he was being chased. According to some officers, his throat had previously been slashed.
There was no autopsy or investigation. November 1988. Keith McCaskill, who was allegedly at the tracks that night, turned over information he had about the boys' murders to Richard Garrett. Believing he had talked to the wrong people, McCaskill had made his own funeral arrangements, told family and friends goodbye, and within days was murdered himself, stabbed 113 times. His murder remains unsolved.
113 times. His murder remains unsolved.
The night of elections in 1988, he took 2 pennies out of his pocket and threw them on the bar there at the wagon wheel and said, "If Jim Steed loses this election, my life isn't worth 2 cents." And he was murdered that night.
Harmon, Garrett, and members of the Arkansas police suddenly found themselves in the awkward position of having to try and convince the public that the deaths of these key witnesses, coming at a crucial point in the investigations, were merely a coincidence.
I think that Mr. McCaskill was probably suffering from a lot of paranoia. And right now the indications are that nobody else was involved.
Might there have been a reason, though, for his paranoia?
I'm sure there was a reason for his paranoia.
Because he talked to police and prosecutors.
I remember that would be the reason.
What about the murder? Is it connected at all with the grand jury investigation?
Not that we know of.
Tens of millions of dollars. Launder it, clean it up, and use the cover of a state agency to do it. The first loan made at ADFA was made to Parkometer, a company called Parkometer. Seth Ward was the owner. As I started looking, I found out that the Secretary Treasurer was Webb Hubbell. Then I found out Webb Hubbell was Seth Ward's son-in-law. Guess who drafted the legislation creating Act 1062, which created the Arkansas Development Finance Authority? Webb Hubbell. Guess who introduced the legislation to our legislators and got it passed through our House? Webb Hubbell. Guess who got the first loan? Webb Hubbell. Imagine this. Guess who did the audit and the evaluation of the application? Rose Law Firm. You guessed it. Who signed it? Webb Hubbell, Hillary Clinton. You see, that's against the law in Arkansas. You can't investigate yourself when the good faith and credit of the state of Arkansas is involved in a bond issue. He broke the law. Good Lord willing, creek don't rise. Mr. Hubbell will be serving some time in the pen for that one.
Ironically, Webb Hubbell, a senior partner at the Rose Law Firm, was chairman of the Conflicts of Interest Committee at Rose. In 1988, he successfully advanced the Ethics in Government Act, which required Arkansas legislators to report governmental conflicts of interest. Incredibly, this law specifically exempted Governor Bill Clinton, his appointees, and his relatives. Incredibly, this law specifically exempted Governor Bill Clinton, his appointees, and his relatives.
Clinton's appointment of Hubble to the U.S. Justice Department exemplified the administration's total disregard for legal ethics. Hubble's hasty resignation in March 1994 for overbilling of Roe's clients was merely a ploy to remove Hubble from the limelight before extensive criminal charges could be brought against him.
Let me tell you about Parkometer. The first loan was $2.85 million. Never was a penny of that paid back. As the newspaper people started inquiring about the Parkometer loans, what they found was that Parkometer was actually building retrofit nose cone compartments that were being shipped to MENA. We find out that the nose cones were actually being used to smuggle dope back into the country. And what is scary, what's so scary, it's the same cast of characters. Webb Hubble, the Rose Law Firm, are guilty, I say to you, of conspiring to defraud the state of Arkansas, the federal government, and conspired to solicit the sales and the laundering of money for illegal drugs. This is your president. This is a circle of power. These are the people, when he got elected president, he did not pass go. He took them straight to Washington with him.
This is your president. This is a circle of power. These are the people, when he got elected president, he did not pass go. He took them straight to Washington with him.
And by all things holy, I think he was planning to set up and do the same thing in Washington.
In 1982, cocaine trafficker Barry Seal set up one of the largest drug smuggling operations in the United States in Mena, Arkansas, under the approving eye of Governor Bill Clinton.
Barry Seal had a bunch of planes and supposedly had pilots. Barry Seal was a drug smuggler. Now, he tried to set it up in his home state of Louisiana, but they wouldn't let him. He had to come to a state that had a sleazy governor hooked on cocaine, and everybody knew it.
That had a sleazy governor hooked on cocaine, and everybody knew it.
Was hooked on cocaine.
I lived in Little Rock, Arkansas, okay? And I worked at a club called Le Bistro's. And I met Roger Clinton there, Governor Bill Clinton. So a couple of the state troopers that went with him wherever he went, Roger Clinton had came up to me and he had asked me, could I get him some coke, you know, and asked for my one-hitter, which a one-hitter is a very small silver device, okay, that you stick up into your nose and you just squeeze it and a snort of cocaine will go up in there. And I watched Roger hand what I had given him to Governor Clinton, and he just kind of turned around and walked off, and that's one specific. It led to toga parties. And if you're not sure on what a toga party is, I've had to clarify this in the past. A toga party is where you wrap yourself in a sheet most of the time. The people at the toga parties were Governor Clinton, now President Clinton, Attorney General Steve Clark. Okay, he was there a few times. Members of the Arkansas State Police, you know, along with Roger and, you know, other people. They began to dance around, do the cocaine in one room, have sex in another room, because in the Coachman's Inn, the rooms were adjoining, you know. And to be quite truthful, you end up with somebody in particular, and you 9 times out of 10 end up having sex.
Quite truthful, you end up with somebody in particular, and you 9 times out of 10 end up having sex.
past 10 years, I have often been the subject of inaccurate and misleading news articles. Outrageous and totally false stories about me have appeared in both the local and national newspapers and magazines. A good example of that was in this morning's Wall Street Journal, where I was called a convicted drug dealer by Mr. Simpson. And I challenged Mr. Simpson and Wall Street Journal at this time to prove any evidence that they have on that, because that's not been the case.
Did I understand you to deny a moment ago that you were convicted for conspiracy to distribute narcotics?
No. I said I was not a convicted drug dealer.
Well,
I was convicted of social distribution of cocaine.
Mr. Lassiter, there is no crime of social distribution of cocaine. You were convicted of conspiracy to possess and distribute cocaine, a federal felony. Isn't that correct?
That is correct, but I did not sell drugs.
Mr. Lassiter, you were indicted for conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute cocaine. Is that correct?
That is correct, but I repeat, that was on a social basis.
We'll get to that in a second, but first let's be 100% clear about the crime you pled guilty to, okay? And when you pled guilty, you got up in front of a federal judge?
Yes, sir.
You raised your hand?
Yes, sir.
Swore an oath?
Yes, sir.
And you admitted your guilt to the crime to which you were charged, correct?
Correct.
And the crime is possession with intent to distribute cocaine, right?
That's correct.
And there is no separate crime for social distribution of cocaine, is there?
I don't know if there's a separate crime or not, but I think there's a separate moral issue.
So you think it's morally better to give cocaine away than to sell cocaine? That's the distinction you're drawing, right?
I guess that's the distinction.
Because when you give it away, you're doing a favor to the people you give it to. Is that your thinking about it?
I think there's a difference between selling cocaine and using it in a social basis.
Now, we're not talking about using it. We're talking about giving it to other people to use. I just think we need, since you're coming up here and you've made an issue in your opening statement about questions of your character and this whole issue of what you were convicted for, let's get straight. In your mind, you see a difference between selling drugs to other people and giving drugs to other people.
Yes, I do.
All right, and you think it's better to be giving it than selling it?
Yes, I do.
And you used to give drugs to your employees, right?
Yes, I have.
Kind of like a bonus, right?
No, sir.
It was kind of compensation?
No, sir.
Did you do it in order to control them or to have leverage over them?
No, sir.
And you also said that Mr. Lassiter used cocaine to reward people or to control people that were loyal to him, right?
If you're reading from my statement, then that's my statement.
I think there's a copy of this statement that's, if it's not in your package, we'll get it down to you. It's memo to file, October 14, 1986. Now, I understand you didn't prepare this. It's a memo prepared by the investigators.
That's not in the folder.
Well, I've just given it to given to the witness. Well, the last paragraph, it became obvious to him, that's you, that Dan Lassiter was using cocaine as a tool to manipulate his peers and force them to serve as a buffer between the authorities and his cocaine abuse. And then it lists a number of people who were involved in getting cocaine. Lassiter also considered these people loyal to him because he used cocaine to control them for his benefit.
I'm not prepared to deny it, no.
All right. Now, I want to ask you, Mr. Lassiter, you gave drugs to your employees, right?
Right.
You gave drugs to your chauffeur, right? That was Chuck Berry?
No.
Or he gave drugs to you?
That's correct.
He bought drugs for you?
That's correct.
And you gave drugs to people you were entertaining, right?
Right.
Well, even underage people you were entertaining, right?
Right.
And you gave drugs to people you were entertaining, right? Right. Well, even underage people you were entertaining, right? Right. Well, even underage people you were entertaining, right? Right.
So I just want to make sure we have kind of your moral compass out here, that giving drugs away to your employees and to people you're entertaining, even if they're underage, that's better than selling it. You see a distinction there. That's your position before this committee.
I think there's a difference, yes.
You know, let me tell you something. I've seen, I put a lot of witnesses on over the years who've done bad things, and I am a firm believer that people do put things behind them and they achieve redemption. But I also know that the first step to that is honesty and accountability for something someone has done wrong. And I have to tell you, I am astonished to hear you say that you actually view your act as having given drugs away to these people as somehow morally distinct from selling it.
Particular one comes to mind is a 14-year-old cheerleader out of North Little Rock. She was a virgin, and ultimately he ended up sending her to a physician of his. The physician put her on birth control pills. He used cocaine in order to ultimately she lost her virginity, and she got addicted to cocaine. And the last I heard of her, when we had her subpoenaed back to the federal grand jury, she was a hooker in Lake Tahoe.
There was cocaine there. I know. I'm the one that made sure it was there.
I've talked to the manager, the assistant manager for the apartment complex where Roger Clinton used to live. They've all said Bill Clinton did drugs. They saw him. I've talked to a lot of other people who have all, just like the people at the apartment complex, said, hey, John, get us to a congressional hearing. Yes, we'll sign sworn affidavits. These people want to be sure when they come forward that something's done about it because they fear for their life, but they really want the truth to get out.
I was there, we're coming there with Roger one night, and back in the back part of the mansion there's kind of like a living quarters type thing, and we would all get together out there and do cocaine, you know, and no, Miss Clinton wasn't there at the time.
In 1983, I was made aware that Sheriff Hadaway and one of his auxiliary deputies, Terry Capehart, were investigating a smuggling operation going on at the Mena airport. They had an inside source of information.
Mr. Seal, it was our understanding, was the one who had brought the operation into the Mena airport, and that had initiated the beginning of the money laundering and the illegal activity.
He said 1983 was his most profitable cocaine smuggling period ever. Said that the airplanes that he had placed at the Mena airport, there were 4 of them, a couple of Senecas and a couple of Panthers, and 1 or 2 stragglers, here and there, different airplanes. He said they were purchased solely for the purpose of cocaine smuggling.
There was, in my opinion, more than enough evidence to prosecute a number of people for crimes regarding the Barry Seal case at Mena.
I snuck around, crawled through the bushes, thinking that I'd really have to hide to see them unloading the dope. Didn't have to. You could walk right up to the airport and they'd unload it right in front of you. They would unload it, they'd offload it. They didn't care.
A certain degree of money laundering had taken place among these people that were associated with Barry Seal.
What had not been done was to connect the dotted lines to ADFA. Because once you connected the dotted lines to ADFA, you had actually connected the dotted line to Clinton.
In addition to the operations at Mena, small clearings in other parts of the state were used as drop points for money and cocaine.
They had special cargo doors installed on the side without FAA permission, so that these doors could be opened in flight. They'd pull in, slide back, and the cocaine could be dropped out of the side in flight.
When you have a public which is aware of an ongoing criminal enterprise, when you have an international cocaine smuggler who is high profile
And a lot of people know that they are operating in a small area. A lot of people knew about the money laundering. It was common gossip on the street because it was so blatant. And they see investigations ongoing for several years. And they keep watching for indictments. They know grand juries are convening. They know that witnesses are supposed to be providing evidence to a grand jury, yet year after year after year, no indictments are returned. People lose confidence in the system.
Clinton had integrated a number of corrupt cops, judges, and politicians into high-level positions to ensure the continued success of the drug smuggling, money laundering operations. Corrupt cops, judges, and politicians into high-level positions to ensure the continued success of the drug smuggling, money laundering operations. All was going well until a fateful night in the fall of 1987.
On August 22nd, 1987, Kevin had spent the night with his friend Don Henry. They left Don's home around 12:30 or quarter to 1 on the 23rd of August in early morning hours, and the next thing we knew, they had been run over by a train. There seems to be a small airstrip in the area. There have been sightings and reports of small airplanes flying very low with lights off in the area. I believe they saw something they shouldn't have seen. 3 weeks later, their deaths were ruled accidental by the state medical examiner, Fahmy Malik, and we disagreed with that ruling because we thought the evidence pointed to homicide. At that point, we had a lot of questions and no answers. And the facts didn't add up to what he was telling us, so we decided to get a second opinion and met with resistance from all fronts, both with our local law enforcement, with the state crime lab, with everybody that we turned to. We obtained court orders, we requesting samples of everything that the crime lab had for a second opinion, and Fahmy Malik resisted court orders. He refused to obey them.
Ultimately, it was proven that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back and Kevin Ives' skull had been crushed prior to the placement of their bodies on the railroad tracks. However, Malik stood by his ruling that the boys had simply fallen asleep on the track. Ultimately, it was proven that Don Henry had been stabbed in the back and Kevin Ives' skull had been crushed prior to the placement of their bodies on the railroad track. As long as Malik's rulings pleased the governor's office or state police, they were left to stand, no matter how implausible. Malik's obvious lack of medical knowledge reached a pinnacle when he ruled that James Milam, who had been decapitated, had died of natural causes. Yet Clinton, who had the power to remove Malik from office, insisted he stay.
There were allegations of tampering with evidence in murder cases. There were allegations of perjury in different cases. It didn't seem to matter what Malik did. Clinton protected him. He made excuses such as he's overworked, he's just stressed out. They gave him a $14,000 raise, which was an insult to my family as well as a lot of others in the state who to this day are struggling with asinine rulings in the deaths of children and other loved ones. I was outraged that protecting a political crony of Clinton's was more important than the fact that 2 young boys had been murdered.
January 1989. Greg Collins, who failed to appear after being subpoenaed to testify before Kevin and Don's grand jury, was killed by a shotgun blast to the face. His murder remains unsolved. March 1989. A friend of both Coney and Collins disappeared. An article of beardless clothing was found in the vicinity where an anonymous caller claimed his murder had taken place. His body was never recovered. April 1989. Jeff Rhodes was murdered after telling his family he knew too much about Kevin, Don, and McCaskill's murders. Rhodes had been shot in the head and his remains set on fire in a dump. July 1989. Richard Winters, another grand jury witness, was gunned down during a robbery, which apparently was staged to cover his murder. His case remains unsolved. June 1989.
whose testimony might have solved this case years ago have systematically been eliminated.
The people whose testimony might have solved this case years ago have systematically been eliminated.
There apparently was a great deal of fear that these people could implicate very powerful players.
The 8-month-long grand jury investigation into Kevin and Don's murder came to an abrupt halt December 31st, 1988. Last-minute legal maneuvering by Harmon, Garrett, and presiding Judge John Cole prevented the jurors from revealing their findings in the final report. The men and women of the grand jury were sent home frustrated that they had not been allowed to do their job.
The tracks immortalized by a book and a movie and in the hearts of friends and family who knew Kevin Ives and Don Henry. It has been 25 years since their deaths, but Channel 7's Janelle Lilly was at an event today where the parents of those teens called for a new investigation, hoping to finally figure out how their boys were killed.
What's a birthday party without balloons? Today would have been Kevin Ives' 42nd birthday. Instead, it's nearing the 25th anniversary of his death on those Saline County railroad tracks. The crowd of people grew still during an impromptu moment of silence as a train passed by the Alexander City Park. It was on those tracks that Kevin and his friend Don Henry were found all those years ago. City Alderman Farron Wadley remembers the day he learned his friends were not coming back to school.
Yeah, I was in shock, and I was in class, and I was wondering where they were, because they were very popular, boys in school.
It was Wadley's idea to create a memorial, not just for the boys, but so their families will know that Kevin and Don will not be forgotten.
We want them to know that they were loved and that they're missed.
It's a touching tribute for the parents whose sons will always be those 17-year-old boys on the tracks. It comforts them to know they aren't alone in their grief or in their quest for answers.
They want to see justice. They want to see Kevin and Dawn receive the investigation that they should have received from the very beginning. It's amazing that 25 years later we're still here doing this.
And they'll continue to honor their children by seeking justice. However, today was more about healing and remembering.
Love you to the moon and back.
And as you saw right there, hundreds of balloons released today. Janelle tells us each had a message to Kevin and Don. As for the investigation into their death, it is still technically ongoing, but the family wants it to become active again, and today they encourage folks to sign a petition to encourage authorities to take a closer look at that case and the teens' deaths.
What are you doing? Working on a #1 hit. Oh, a new song? No, a Tyson Chicken Quick breast patty. Tyson Chicken Quick? A #1 hit? Yep. More people pick them than any other patty. They're 100% breast of chicken. 100%? 100%. Most other brands aren't. And the patties are part of a whole family. Hoagies, fillets,
Oh, then it's a family album.
That's it. Tyson's greatest hit.
Ever wonder why Tyson chicken tasted so good in the 1980s? Or why you always wanted to have more? Meet Don Tyson, former president of Tyson Foods, who took over the family business in 1966 with annual revenues of $38 million per year, and by 2001 turned it into a giant, making $7.4 billion a year. And like Dan Lasseter, Tyson, another multimillionaire in the food industry, would play a prominent role in Bill Clinton's political activities. And growing up in the 1980s, I remember hearing the rumors about Tyson Foods shipping cocaine around the country in their chickens. And I just thought, nah, that can't be. That's just a wild rumor.
I had heard rumors of Don Tyson and his alleged cocaine use and distribution. And I went through the intelligence files and come up with enough that I thought was sufficient amount of evidence to launch an investigation on Mr. Tyson's simply out of the Arkansas State Police intelligence files that's been accumulated for years.
A great deal of criminal investigation files were surfacing with Don Tyson's name mentioned in there as being involved with some drug and narcotics trafficking activities. So I interviewed some of the investigators who worked on the Tyson case. Most of them felt that Tyson should have been indicted, but the investigations were always sabotaged, oftentimes from within.
I'm Billy Jack Haynes, former World Wrestling Federation wrestler. Today I come with no mask, I come with no hidden voice, I come to you straight face to face. A former drug trafficker, I'm ashamed to say, and a hired enforcer. In the late 70s and early 1980s, when I was in my 30s, I stood 6'3" and weighed between 260 and 300 pounds. I was very visually intimidating. I'm not proud to say that. In the 1980s, I transported and trafficked large quantities of cocaine throughout the United States of America. I bought cocaine from the largest drug trafficker in the United States, Barry Seal, out of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I would then sell that cocaine to contacts around the United States. Barry Seal later introduced me to a politician drug dealer from Arkansas.
It's been over 30 years since two teenage boys were found dead on these tracks in Saline County. The tracks are still here, and so is the mystery regarding what happened. What's new is a witness has come forward.
I witnessed everything that happened.
He has nothing to gain and everything to lose.
I think he's telling 100% truth.
The new witness speaks out for the very first time what he saw that tragic night, Thursday at 10.
That originated out of Mena Airport, which was part of the smuggling operations that Barry Seal had started up at the Mena Airport in 1982 during Iran-Contra, and were still ongoing long after his murder.
Sir, the Republicans are trying to blame you for the existence of a small air base at Mena, Arkansas. This base was set up by George Bush and Oliver North and the CIA to help the Iran-Contras, and they brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for sale in the United States. And then they took the money and bought weapons and took them back to the Contras, all of which was illegal, as you know, under the Bolin Act. But tell me, did they tell you that this had to be in existence because of national security?
Yeah, this is definitely a good hash brand. You don't know anything about the forest? My buddy here. This is Betty in Arkansas? Right. He's just saying a little prick. He got any coke? Yeah, he's got plenty of coke. What do you say? What is your wife? Why is he wants to talk to me because he's heard that I mean, I've never met two of them. As a matter of fact, this past week, I've been talking to people in town. Well, it's just a couple of detectives. But see, the thing is, one's Travis Dunn. Yeah. That's not one. I really don't like to say any names because I don't like to even talk about it. Because that's what keeps me one step ahead. Because I've got about 4 or 5 people in uniform that keep an eye on these people that keep an eye on me. You know, and these uniform people help me stay one step ahead of the game.
They brought in plane load after plane load of cocaine there for for sale in the United States.
Well, let me answer the question. No, they didn't tell me anything about it. They didn't say anything to me about it. The airport in question and all the events in question were the subject of state and federal inquiries. It was primarily a matter for federal jurisdiction. The state really had next to nothing to do with it. The local prosecutor did conduct an investigation based on what was within the jurisdiction of state law.
Back to me, and I never heard back.
Years later, Clinton said he offered $25,000 to Prosecutor Black's boss to fund a grand jury. But Charles Black and his boss claim they never heard about any offer of money from Governor Clinton.
I believe Bill Clinton's an honest, respectable man, and I have to believe that he did that. But the fact is, I never got that word myself.
The rest of it was under jurisdiction of the United States attorneys who were appointed successively by previous administrations. We had nothing, zero, to do with it, and everybody who's ever looked into it knows that.
The United States Department of Justice did not pursue the cases, did not present the evidence of money laundering to the grand jury.
Former U.S. Attorney Mike Fitzhugh, who handled the MENA cases, says that was because Agent Duncan asked for a delay.
I consented to his request that the matter not be presented at the grand jury session meeting in January of '86.
Agent Duncan says he made no such request.
That is absolutely false.
An FBI internal memo from early February 1986, obtained by CBS News, says Fitzhugh was withholding presentation of the indictment. But there is no mention of a request from IRS agent Duncan for a delay.
I would have been the last person in the world to have tried to delay evidence going to the grand jury.
We asked Attorney Fitzhugh if he was told to delay the indictment by the Reagan Justice Department.
There was not any type of pressure or influence put on me or anyone in my office that I'm aware of.